Okay, I think we'll get started. Thank you all for joining. My name is Abigail Valdimas, and I'm CaLP's Research and Knowledge Management Coordinator. I'll be facilitating today's meeting. And we, as previously stated, we will be discussing evidence from cash transfer programming in Liberia and Sierra Leone, looking specifically at micro-level changes in market recovery and growth in the aftermath of the Ebola crisis. Today's presentation will cover 4 topics. First, we will hear from Amandine Fresetti on an introduction to the USAID FFP CTP Ebola response and the outcome analysis that has just been completed. We will then hear about the findings from the outcome analysis from Uwe Galoma, who will be discussing specifically how cash transfer programming stimulates trade and demand in remote areas, looking at the indicative evidence of micro-level changes. Following that presentation of the findings, we will hear from Sarah Harden and Andrew Simbois from Save the Children, who will be discussing the opportunities to link local producer groups and traders through CTP programming. Finally, we will hear from Grace Scotland Biama on how CTP stimulated village saving and loans associations during and in the aftermath of the Ebola crisis and how these impacted the communities. We will then have time for questions and answers. But if you have questions during the presentation, please do feel free to write them in the chat box, and we will, if they aren't answered through the presentations, we will come back to them. All right, and without further ado, I will pass the microphone over to Amandine Fresetti.
Hi everyone, my name is Amandine Fresetti. I'm the CaLP Ebola project manager, and I've been working on the research regarding cash transfer programming implemented by Food for Peace in response to the food insecurity created by the Ebola crisis since the past 2 years. I'm going right now to give you more information about the context of implementation, about the cash transfer programming response of Food for Peace, and introducing you the outcome analysis before giving the microphone to Uwe Galoma. So just an information is that webinar, as well as our research, is only concerning Liberia and Sierra Leone. So all the information in that webinar will be related to those 2 countries. In terms of context, it's important to mention that Liberia and Sierra Leone have a high level of poverty because more 80% of the population is living above a poverty level, and that the first source of revenue is agriculture. So when Ebola struck in Liberia and Sierra Leone early 2014, and that quarantine measures start being settled, it completely destroyed the local economy, and people were not able to reach their farm to take care of their crops, creating a big food insecurity over both countries. To tackle that, Food for Peace settled a massive cash response to really tackle the food insecurity created by the crisis, but also to relaunch the local economy. And they decided to implement through 9 partners unconditional cash transfer in both countries. Unconditional and unrestricted, meaning that the beneficiary, they were free to use the money as they wanted, even though the main purpose was for food security. So through that response, which started at the earliest mid-2015 and for some of the partners ended early 2018, Food for Peace was able to cover more than 130,000 households over both countries. So as you can see in the matrix on the right of the slide, you have the different Food for Peace partners in each country. 4 partners in Liberia: Save the Children, PCI, Mercy Corps, and ACDI VOCA. So Save the Children is with us today. In Sierra Leone, 5 partners: ACDI VOCA, CARE, Save the Children, CRS, and World Vision. We would like to come to give more information about each response implemented in each country, because their design were completely different, and it's important to have that knowledge to understand what happened in terms of result in each country. In terms of Liberia, so we have the 4 Food for Peace partners. We came together to align most of their response, and going for a distribution lasting at least 6 months, but which means more 6 distribution, because sometimes the context was too challenging to do distribution every month, distributing an amount of 50 USD by month, and so going with a monthly frequency. In terms of targeting, most of the partners, they were free to select the profile they thought they were the most vulnerable, so it was a categorical profile selection targeting. Regarding the delivery mechanism, all the cash was delivered through unconditional and unrestricted cash transfer through different ways, like electronic, like e-transfer for few of the partners, but most of the cash was delivered through direct cash transfer, directly by the partners or through the service of a bank, EcoBank in our case. From the outset of the response in Liberia, all the partners implemented a complementary activity, which was mostly done through agricultural input voucher. And the response in Liberia started in 2015 and ended for the last partner at the end of 2016. So it was a little bit a while ago. Regarding Sierra Leone, the response is really different, first due to the coordination. The government and the cash working group decided to settle some standard operating procedure, asking every partner, every stakeholder who wanted to do any cash transfer programming in the country in response to the Ebola crisis to align on key aspects. Those aspects were frequency, amount, delivery mechanism, targeting, and feedback mechanism. So the 5 Food for Peace partners are starting their response by respecting those SOPs. One of the things which is important to mention is none of the partners included a complementary activity from the outset of a response in Sierra Leone. Only Save the Children included a conditional cash transfer to traders when they start that first phase. After 14 months for some, because this was the longest time when the Food for Peace partner implementing their project in Sierra Leone, most of them realized that some people were still very vulnerable, so they decided to go for a phase 2, an extension phase of 1 year, which was done last year in 2017, and which included a complementary activity. Just an additional information, for that phase 2, some of the beneficiaries were former beneficiary and some of the beneficiaries were new beneficiary, depending on the assessment of each partner. So what is the role of CaLP in that response? Well, basically, it's the first time that Food for Peace is investing so much in cash transfer programming in a unique context of epidemic. And the idea of the partnership is really to capitalize and document on what has been done in order to really feed any further response in similar context. To do so, CaLP has been working with all Food for Peace partners and Food for Peace HQ from the outset of that project, having access to most of the documentation of the data, organizing several learning events to really exchange information and ideas around that. We developed 3 main publication research. The first one is a documentation report, which is really documenting the response in terms of context, coordination, design of response, delivery mechanisms, challenges, service provider mapping, including as well the feedback of the beneficiary in the field, because we had the opportunity to lead several focus group discussions. In that case, it was 40, to really document as well their input in the documentation report. Second publication was a case study about the use of new technology, because from the outset of a response, when you are in a politic of an environment of no-touch policy, most of the partners wanted to implement e-transfer, but it was very challenging. So only 3 had the possibility to do so, and sometimes with some innovative way. Then, such as most of the project ended, we developed and we just finalized it, an outcome analysis, aiming to assessing the effectiveness and appropriateness of the response, and really to capture social and economical outcomes for the beneficiary and their communities. I just would like to tell you a little bit more on that one, because that webinar, and particularly the part coming just after mine, is really based on that outcome analysis. So this is really a qualitative research, gathering secondary and primary data. So we did a massive desk review with all food for peace partners data, documentation, quarterly report, assessment, and other stakeholder publication. But we also did a very important round of field data collection using participatory methods. So basically, we went in every project, every localization. We started key informant interview with community leaders such as imam and town chief. We work with them around timeline, we work with them around seasonal calendars, and then we led 66 in overall focus group discussion with very specific profile to identify trends. It represents more than 260 hours of really in-depth discussion, where we really took the time to speak with the beneficiary to capture properly their feedback and to identify trends. To validate those trends, we use the triangulation, so triangulating the secondary and the primary data to have trends that we could use for the report.
Thank you, Amandine. We'll now hear from Uwe Galuma, the consultant who conducted the research, and she will speak specifically on the topic of cash transfer programming in stimulating trade and demand in remote areas. Thank you, Uwe.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So my name is Uwe Galuma, and as Amandine and Abby mentioned, I was responsible for the outcome analysis, design, and implementation of the actual assessment. So basically here we will be presenting, as Abby said, indicative trends, evidence about some of these more local level changes in traders' behavior and certain market dynamics. So the focus here is really going to be on what was the effect of the CTP on traders' behavior, and then the second aspect we'll talk about a bit is how the cash transfer influence beneficiaries' interaction with markets. Okay. So just maybe to give a quick background on markets in remote rural areas of Sierra Leone and Liberia, I think this is quite similar in many areas in sub-Saharan Africa. Sorry, I'm having a bit of trouble. Okay. So basically, these communities depend heavily on subsistence farming, and of course, what they produce cannot cover all their consumption needs. So there's a really high dependency, especially of poor households, on markets. And in more remote areas, it's a high dependency on your weekly markets that happen every week. So there's also, especially in Sierra Leone and especially, sorry, in Liberia, there's an issue of poor road networks, especially during the rainy season, that impact negatively on market access. And that in turn, of course, reduces opportunities to reach lucrative markets for producers. And leads to high, of course, fuel costs, which increase the cost of transportation and food prices. So you will find higher food prices in these areas compared to regional markets or to the capital markets in the capitals such as Monrovia and Freetown. And due to the remoteness of these areas, there's really limited access to financial services, which could help producers develop more their activities. So we looked at the effects on traders' behavior, and it's true that implementing partners did monitor, let's say, larger scale impacts of the CTP on markets. So a lot of the focus was on price monitoring. And what we tended to see was, of course, traders would tend to bring in more quantities of food around. They would bring in the supply around a few days before the cash transfer started. And we also saw that they increased in addition to supply, the variety. But what we also saw was that they tended to influence a bit demand, meaning they brought in new products that were never actually available on the markets, even in the pre-Ebola days. So you would see bigger fish, you would see certain types of more expensive yam, like the cocoa yam. Maybe you'd see margarine and bread, products that actually weren't there before. So in a way, they were influencing demand and spending. We also, because of the predictability of these cash transfers, 6 months up to almost 2 years in Sierra Leone, this was seen as a very important business opportunity worth investing in for a lot of traders in the short term to medium term. So some traders would actually take out credit from banks to supply their shops before the cash transfer, monthly or every 3 months cash transfer. We also saw a pull factor on the day of distribution. So when traders would know that the distribution was about to happen, they would bring in their products around the distribution site. And of course, your beneficiaries would have a monthly amount of a cash transfer sometimes, and then also in Sierra Leone, maybe 3 months or more of a cash transfer. So this would, in a way, entice beneficiaries to spend on certain items that the traders brought instead of beneficiaries going directly to the market. And even though price monitoring of a number of food for pieces implementing partners was regularly done, again, I said this was more on a probably macro level or a larger level, larger markets. There were some isolated and targeted price hikes that were not captured by this monitoring. So you would see around the day of distribution, certain commodities, the price would go up, for example, for dried fish or your Maggi cubes, certain condiments. You wouldn't see price hikes for cereals like rice, but for certain products definitely. And this would target specifically CTP beneficiaries. There are also certain price rises in certain services offered, such as transportation, around the day of the cash transfer distribution. In terms of cash recipients' interaction with markets, we also looked at that. And we saw, of course, because they had more cash on hand, they had more freedom to choose the markets they could access. So a lot of them tended to go to maybe larger markets further away, but where food commodities were cheaper. And of course, then they would buy bulk purchases with the cash. They would also pay for transportation with part of the cash transfer, and this and the bulk commodities they would buy would be for consumption and also for sale. We also noticed quite a significant increase in the amount of people doing petty trade. So, of course, the money contributed especially to women being able to invest more in their businesses, either to expand it or increase the range of products, or for a number of women to actually start a petty trade business. And of course, there's the strong linkage between petty trade and agricultural production. The cash transfer was also used on agricultural inputs, and in turn, certain products, including certain cash crops, were used to do petty trade, and then the profits from petty trade to reinvest in agricultural production. And in some towns, for example, a town called Pelimu in Bong County in Liberia, we actually saw an emergence of village markets. This is a big village that was quite far, and this is something we saw in other villages, quite far away from markets. Maybe a 3-hour walk to get to markets. So they were again dependent on weekly markets, which were also far from the village. And a number of the beneficiaries would again buy commodities with the cash transfer and invest in petty trade in the village. So you saw more vibrant market that developed because of the CTP cash transfer programming intervention. And we're just going to give you an example here with 5 villages in Liberia, and we chose Liberia because the CTP intervention had ended 1 year to 2 years previously. So we would look at the change in the number of traders. The gray line is the pre-Ebola period, 2013-14. The orange line is during the CTP intervention period, and the blue line is when we came in to do the assessment. And as you can see, there was an increase in the number of traders in some cases. And when the CTP intervention ended, the number of traders would decrease. In other cases, you would see after the CTP intervention ended, the number of traders would actually continue to grow. So here, there are a number of factors that we couldn't explore during the assessment because it was beyond the scope of the study, but obviously there are a number of factors that influence the sustainability of these market outcomes. We also looked at the impact of the CTP intervention on credit services, trader-sourced credit services. In a lot of more rural, remote areas, communities, especially poor communities, depend heavily on mobile traders who come in during the hunger period, the lean period, to provide their credit services, especially when stocks are running dry and when also communities have to start preparing for the school year. And those interest rates are quite high, from 25 to 50%. There are also some communities that were involved in BRAC programs. BRAC is the international NGO based in Bangladesh, and they have a very strong microfinance program where they support certain groups of women, and they offer credit services at a interest rate of 13 to 25%. Now, when the CTP intervention started, a lot of communities stopped taking out of credit, of course, because they had cash on hand, and meaning they stopped using traders. And this happened for the entire duration of the cash transfer program intervention, up to, let's say, 2 years in Sierra Leone. And the cash transfer also allowed for the reanimation and creation of savings groups, and these groups offered credit services of 5 to 10%. So, you know, with all these outcomes, which are very strong trends, of course, it brings up areas for further reflection. And one of them, of course, is the sustainability of CTP market trading outcomes. As we saw in the previous graph I showed, at times these outcomes remain after the intervention is over and continue to grow. What are the factors leading to this, and what are the factors that actually impede this? We saw that there was a dependency on credit networks before in very remote rural areas. Having the CTP intervention in these areas actually created a less dependency on these credit networks. Now, what would happen what happened when the CTP intervention ended? Do communities still need these credit networks? It's 2 years maybe in Sierra Leone where they have not used these networks, so it would be very interesting to see what has happened actually with these credit networks. How do they access credit after such an intervention? And of course, we see CTP has influenced heavily market petty trade, and in some cases we saw, for example, in Sierra Leone, that this caused exponential growth in the number of traders in certain villages, and we did have traders who we met and interviewed who claimed that this actually led to market saturation, and it negatively impacted on their business because they weren't able to sell as they had done before. And one of the key objectives of the CTP response was to increase access to markets. So this was through increasing purchasing power, but then we do see there are real physical barriers to market access, especially the poor road networks. And beneficiaries did use part of their cash transfer to pay for transportation, but now that the program is finished, how do they access markets, and how can CTP be better integrated into other programs that support, for example, small-scale road rehabilitation projects? We did see some partners that provided unconditional cash grants in one village, a very remote area, but did cash for work in a village that was on the side of a main road. So there needs to be a better integration of these of cash transfer programming with probably other programs that increase the physical access to markets.
Thank you, Yves. Apologies, there seems to be some small connection issues with us here in Dakar. We are doing our best to work on those, but hopefully we'll move now to Sarah Harden and Andrew Simbois, from Save the Children, who will be talking to us about the opportunities to link local producer groups and traders through cash transfer programming. Over to you both.
Thank you so
much. Sarah, Andrew?
much, everyone.
Andrew, are you
Hi, Andrew. I'm not sure if your connection is working. You're cutting in and out quite a lot. Are others having the same problem?
Ebola, and we had different parts of the program, from cash transfers to households to conditional cash transfers to vendors, and later on to some women groups. So I'll do the presentation on the first part for the unconditional cash transfers, and then conditional cash transfers to vendors, and then Sarah Harden will go on to the next part. it like the way all the programs were designed in the aftermath of Ebola, it was in response to the situation that was at hand, the blockages that we were having in place, restrictions that were in place. So the Save the Children designed a program basically to, can you hear me? Sure. So Save the Children designed a program to support market recovery and increase agricultural production. So market recovery was pegged on basically the cash transfers to households, which was good in a sense that we're giving cash, direct cash to our beneficiaries who were able to go get all the food they need or purchase things they needed from the local vendors within their neighborhoods. And the conditional bit of the program, which was for the vendors and the traders, mainly women, help them to restock and then increase their sales, and also there were a lot of things in their neighborhoods for people to get. So the program in a nutshell had three components, like you can see from the slide. So we had the unconditional cash transfers. This was for we had in the first phase around nearly 7,000 households, and then in the second phase we increased the number of households to slightly above 11,000 households. So we were giving transfers of approximately $30 to households, and later we had a safety net aspects for households that were not so badly off, but during some part of the year we're giving them the safety net of $15 to cover 23% of the food basket. Because of the infrastructure issues and the way all of us were working in the Ebola we basically were all relying on distributing money logistically with Splash. But one thing that we did so well in the program was managing of the information that were of the program, and we worked, much of our data was basically on Kobo, and we had another company we worked with on the management information system, Segovia, to make sure that we have dashboards to give us a good feel of the information that we are having on time. So for the trader grants, we worked with 400 traders. There were 399 women. It was not by default that it was mainly supposed to be women, but when we went out there, we found that majority of the vendors we got who had been in business before, because we didn't want to support vendors who had not been in business before. So we wanted to support people who had done business before. So not starting the program with not starting business with anticipation of support, but supporting them because they had been in business before. So we trained these. We went out, surveyed traders, and then from around 700 we got down to 400, and we gave them business.
Andrew, you seem to have cut out again.
Financial literacy.
At least for us here in Dakar.
Then we were giving them $400 in two tranches. So we gave them $200 in the first tranche, and then we went out on a conditionality check to make sure that they use the money to restock their shops, buying the right things that are acceptable by the program and the donor.
Hi, are others able to continue hearing Andrew, or is he cut out for everyone? And maybe Sarah, if it's possible, could you
Yeah, he's cut out. Andrew, you're back on.
Then we gave them a full-on tranche of $200. Then the third bit of the program was on the women in agricultural groups that were provided with that.
We're really not able to continuously hear you. Your microphone keeps cutting out for quite long periods of time. I'm not sure if it's a connection problem with us here in Dakar or a more general problem. Can you hear us?
In
not sure.
Branches to purchase inputs and also do value addition, buying equipment, and also agriculture organization skills and agricultural training. The support
Andrew, I'm really sorry to interrupt you.
traders, I think, was the most catching part of the program. Because initially when we did the assessment, residents in
I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but you've actually been cutting out quite consistently throughout your presentation, and people are having a hard time following it. I don't know if it's a problem with your connection, but I'm wondering if perhaps it would be better if Sarah didn't continue with the presentation, if that's at all possible.
The environment to do business that had forced most of the women to get out of the business. The lady you see there is from one of the chiefdoms called Pegem.
Great, and Sarah, maybe you could just turn up your microphone a little bit.
Called Manoa, who have been.
If you click down the small arrow next to the microphone, you can just turn up the volume because you're just a bit quiet. Sarah, you seem to still be on mute.
I should be here. Are you hearing me now?
Yes, perfect now. Great. Go ahead. Thank you, Andrew. Sorry about that.
I'm on max volume, so hopefully this works. So I'm backing up one step. So picking up where Andrew started to cut out a bit, we provided conditional cash grants to female traders and looked to recapitalize traders who had existing businesses but who needed support in restocking their supplies in order to provide goods to local communities where unconditional cash transfers were being delivered. We also later had a conditional cash traders to groups of women in agriculture and provided a total of 3 tranches to these groups to support, initially to support investments in ag inputs and then later in agro-processing equipment to maximize the benefits of their yields. We also provided support in organizational skills and management and agricultural training. Are you still hearing me?
You're still a little bit quiet, Sarah. I don't know if maybe it's just about speaking more closely into the microphone.
Okay, I'm about as close as I can be, but I will do my best here. All right, so before conducting the trader component, we conducted an assessment to understand the barriers and the challenges these traders were facing. And so, as mentioned before, residents within the areas where we were serving reported disruptions in normal market and livelihood activities, and most of the livelihood activities that had been disrupted were agriculture and trade. As we know, Ebola disrupted the typical market functions, so quarantines restricted movement, cross-border trade, which was particularly important in Kailaun, where our program was implemented, was restricted for so long, and the area depended heavily on cross-border trade with Guinea and Liberia. Transportation costs were increased, and that was exacerbated later when fuel prices went up in country. There was decreased petty trading, fewer opportunities for casual labor generally, and this affected women in our areas who were primarily petty traders and agricultural producers, and so their livelihoods and household income was reduced. And with the regular income and lower food production in areas, lower food consumption followed. So the trader support was intended to help recapitalize these traders, make food and other products available locally within markets where unconditional cash transfers were supporting households in order to access food. So in terms of the outcomes we saw from the female trader support, we measured notable increases in stocks at the local market levels, and the idea behind that was also to help offset any potential inflation caused by the unconditional cash transfers. Our post-distribution monitoring found that 85% of the conditional cash transfers were spent on restocking, and we had anecdotal evidence from a number of traders that they were able to expand their stores, so expanding from 1 table to 2 tables at a local market. Our unconditional cash transfer beneficiaries reported that there was fewer shortages of the foods and the types of foods and quantities that they were trying to buy in local markets, and that was a benefit for the unconditional cash transfer households as well. So lessons learned from our trader components. Our traders reported that they were pooling their resources and together and sending a representative to a larger local market to buy supplies and bring them back to their local market, so benefiting from better prices in bigger markets to then supply their stores in their local markets. A component that we did not have in our program but that may have benefited the areas where we were serving would have been village savings and loans, so savings and lending associations, or ASUSUs, where traders could pool their resources, manage their funds for a longer period of time without spending right away, loan out, and enable them to make bigger investments in their stocks and supplies. And we don't have, hard to measure the impact of this, but we do believe that the unconditional cash grants, the conditional cash grants to the traders help to minimize the negative impact of potential inflation on the local economies. All right, so switching gears to the women in agricultural group support that was provided in basically the last year of the program. Ahead of conducting this activity, we conducted an assessment to try to understand the barriers that our beneficiaries were facing in terms of increasing their production. We found that there were existing women in agricultural groups formed in the communities, but they weren't functioning at full capacity, both in terms of group management, but also in terms of agricultural production. Some of the barriers that they were facing were in accessing appropriate seeds, quality seeds, and tools needed to maximize their produce, in addition to accessing equipment for post-harvest management and processing. In addition, the assessment found that there was an anticipated earlier start to the 2017 lean season. Many households within the program area were continuing to face IPC crisis level, phase 2 food insecurity, and so continued interventions were needed in order to ensure that production increased, livelihoods opportunities were continuing to return, and that the impact of the cash, the unconditional cash, could be sustained beyond the life of the program. And by the time that we were considering this activity, international borders had been opened and market activity was slowly returning, livelihoods were slowly returning, but additional support was needed to help stimulate and maximize the impact of the assistance on that. So the support to women's agricultural groups was both in terms of conditional cash grants and also skills training. We supported the groups with organizational skills, management training, group formation, defining roles and responsibilities, developing business plans, maintaining records, being formally registered with the Ministry of Agriculture, and we supported the groups to open bank accounts so that they could manage both the funds that they're receiving through the program and any future profits that would come in, and helped them to understand, help them to better understand what their gaps were in capacities, and in order to address those. We also worked with the Ministry of Agriculture to provide agronomic skills training around nursery management, planting, weeding, soil fertility, integrated pest management, harvest, post-harvest management. And then the third conditional cash transfer tranche was in order to enable these groups to purchase agro-processing equipment in the form of maize threshers, rice huller mills, threshers, cassava graters, groundnuts, in order to maximize the impact of the improved production on their on their profits. So through the support provided, the groups were able to purchase inputs to produce rice, cassava, sweet potatoes, groundnuts, and a variety of vegetables. They increased the area of their land cultivated over the course of the program. This was self-reported area cultivated before USAID interventions, and then measured area produced after. And so the graph shows significant increases in that area. In terms of lessons learned, we found that partnering with the Ministry of Agriculture helped ensure that the extension farmer relationship exists beyond the end of the program, and we know that these groups are still working with extension agents now, just as the program ended in April. Post-harvest management remains a major challenge. We helped provide, the support provided ensured that these groups had post-harvest technologies in order to ensure that the produce was not lost, but more support would be needed in order to ensure that the machinery is maintained going forward and hopefully in the years to come. We found that there was unanticipated benefits of some of the management trainings provided. We found that households reported they were using conflict management trainings in household and community conflicts, and that this is an unanticipated positive benefit. We found that these groups were continuing to use a substantial amount of the funds that they received for labor hire, about 40%, which is expensive, and could be, there might be ways that they would use labor, free labor, in order to use the money, use the funds received for other purposes. So that would be an area where further sensitization could be done in order to ensure that the funds were maximized. And that additional benefits could be realized by linking these groups with bulk traders for transportation and group marketing in order to ensure that the produce was, that their profits were maximized. So finally, there were a number of opportunities for increased market linkages. Again, linking these producers with traders for longer-term marketing and benefits in economies of scale and grouping their produce. A challenge that we faced was the trader component and the women's agricultural group component were implemented at different times within the program, and so there may have been more linkages that we could have put in place, reinforced, had the activities run at an overlapping time frame, linking the women's agriculture groups with our program traders. And finally, monitoring wasn't designed at the outset of the program to capture the impact of these complementary activities as compared to the unconditional cash. So there weren't samples designed so that you would understand, how a household that received unconditional cash fared compared to the few households that overlapped between those who received unconditional cash and the women's agricultural support. So there might be further opportunities for understanding the impact and potential multiplier effects of these different complementary activities down the line. I'll stop there.
For that, Sarah, Andrew, much appreciated from both of you. At this point, we'll move to our final presentation by Grace Scotland-Briama of We4Self, who will be talking to us about how cash transfer programming stimulated village savings and loan associations during the crisis and how those impacted communities.
Good afternoon, Sarah and Andrew. Hello. Okay. Thank you. So, I'm Andrew. My name is Grace. I work with VSLA. VSLA is an important NGO working especially with women in Liberia. We are partnering with ECF in Liberia. We are going to speak on the impact of cash in stimulating VSLAs in Liberia. Village savings. Okay, VSLAs are owned and operated by its shareholders, most of whom are women operating small businesses in local communities. Almost all of the towns and villages in Liberia were affected by Ebola. Therefore, all of the women in small businesses had problems with their businesses, and some of their businesses were destroyed. Ebola restricted the movement of people, therefore, they had no access to market for the replenishment of their goods and the marketing of the goods they already had. Most of them were forced out of their towns and villages. A particular group of women that were affected mostly were women trading in dry meat. They lost all of their meat, their goods, and everything they had, as it was believed that Ebola was caused by dry meat. So health workers had to go to their homes, spray everything that they had, thereby causing them a great loss. The impact of cash on the VSLA in the communities. As you can see on the screen there, women are now recovering from the Ebola crisis. With the intervention of cash from ECF through WIFOSF in 10 communities in Grand Cape County, we established 10 village savings and associations in 10 Ebola-affected communities. Cash provided to the beneficiary were not only used for food, but was used to purchase shares in village savings and associations. These non-banks are now providing financial services to its members in 10 Ebola-affected communities. This has created access to loans to enable these women re-establish their businesses in the communities. As you can see, the cash there, that's a group of women there sharing their money after, even 1 year after the Ebola, after the cash was given to them. These women now have access and can now do businesses. Also, under this project, we established 10 farming groups. 10, the funds are there. We established 10 farming groups producing cassava. You can see the cassava there on the slide in front of you. So this also has an impact on food security in the communities. About 900 persons benefited from this project and are now doing businesses. 10 established shops, small businesses were established in the communities. They are now visible even after the Ebola. Up to date, 100 shops are now established in these affected communities. Most of these communities are remote. They don't have access to roads. So establishing businesses in their communities is a great help to their communities. And the cash provider was able to help them access loans and be able to access markets in distinct communities to re-establish their businesses. Yeah.
Thank you, Grace. And at this point, we'll like to turn it over to the group for questions. I've already noted some questions in the chat, so we'll start with those. So from Emily Sloan, questions for Uwe. and for our other speakers if they have anything to add on this. Did your data sets allow you to compare findings for vendors with different sizes, and if so, what were the observed differences? We'll start with that. Eva, if I hand this over to you.
Yes, Emily, that's a good question. I think initially we went into this study hoping to compare vendors of different sizes and of different types of commodities. But in the end, in a lot of these villages, it was certainly one type of vendor, because a lot of it depended on the size of the market and how far that market was from the village, to see if there was some perceived impact of the CTP on traders' behavior of prices. So the bigger the market was and the further away it was from the village, there were just no perceived changes in traders' behavior or prices. So very, very often then we're just focusing on one type of trader who's often either in the village market or in a market not far from the village. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you, Yves. And the next question from Emily, which I would actually like to open to any one of our presenters, about what information was communicated to vendors during or before the CTP around, what was going to be happening, any expectations for them, and then were any market support activities conducted in parallel. And I would invite Yves or Save the Children particularly to respond to this one. Sarah, I don't know if you want to come in there.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes?
Yep, Andrew.
Can you hear me? Yes. So basically, what we made sure we don't raise the expectations for the vendors, especially when we're beginning to get information from the vendors how they were doing their businesses. So ideally what we did was to communicate with the community leadership and the market chairman that wanted to get information from the vendors on how they are doing their businesses, how their sales were, and also identify for us people who were, because we're into a period where some people who had been vendors before were now not vendors. So we wanted to identify those people who had been vendors before the Ebola, and now they didn't have probably business because their capital has been all eaten up, and getting information from them, what have you been doing, what did you do before, what type of business do you think you can do business now, how were your sales now for those who are doing business, and those who are not doing business, what are some of the limitations, what are some of the things you can sell once you get some income, and on information on how long they have been doing business and how long they were out of business. So that was kind of information that helped us determine the people to get into the program and who were to moving forward. If I may, that the connection allows, there was a question on the trader characteristics that we looked at to respond to new business opportunities, and what were the limitations. I think the key point that helped us to have a successful program was the fact that we never worked with new people, or we never allowed even the local leaders to be the ones to make the decisions on who is going to be on the program. We only worked with people who had done business before, and all the decisions were made by the program on who is going to be in the program and who is not going to be in the program. So when we gave people money at the end of the day to invest in their businesses, they were able to explore, get into business again, and even increase their businesses. Like before, even there are cases of women who opened additional stalls in some of the chiefdoms that we worked. But the limitation again was the catchment, the geographical location we were working, getting supplies in some locations wasn't so easy. For those who are familiar with Sierra Leone and Cape Verde, some of the vendors are the extreme towards the Liberian side, if they were to get goods, they have to go as far as Kenema or even another town called Bo. So this undermined, and the transportation wasn't easy for them to move goods in those locations. So I think that was one of the key issues, probably that that could have affected some of the vendors exploring into bigger business arenas than they could, because restocking wasn't a very easy thing, and the infrastructure also is not that easy, especially during the rain season, if a vendor wants to restock. Yeah. But there is a point also on the factors that enabled vendors to certain areas to remain higher after the CTP. These were people who were in business before. I think that's the point that will come on over and over. And once we empowered them with cash again, even there were some other effects that we saw, even for vendors that had not even received cash from us. Because once we gave them cash, and vendors who were into SOSOs, VSLAs, they made sure they went back into their VSLAs. They were pulling money together, and in one of the VSLAs, in one of the locations, the condition was they only want to give those vendors who are not received cash assistance from the program to empower themselves. And like one of the points that when I
I've lost Andrew again, but thank you for that, Andrew. That was very helpful. Yuve has indicated that she'd like to comment as well on that question regarding traders and sustainability.
Well, I think this question was more to do with what kind of information was given to traders. And I think in most cases, the implementing partners didn't work directly with traders, except for Save the Children. So in a voucher program, of course, they would definitely communicate heavily with traders. In this case, it wasn't, most likely wasn't done because you don't know where your beneficiaries are going to go. You're not having a direct link with traders, the markets that they access.
Thank you for that. Are there any other questions? If you would rather speak at this point, you can click on the microphone icon at the top of the presentation, and it should enable your microphone. I'm just seeing here a comment. Thank you. From Rang Hee from Food for Peace. That's great. Thanks. Thank you for that, Rang Hee, and thank you for joining the webinar. So I can pass. Thank you, Tyler, for that question. I will hand over to Grace from We for Self regarding their role in the project and how they supported the Village Savings and Loan Associations. My understanding is that they worked with ACF during this project, but I will allow Grace to talk a little bit more about that.
We for Self is an implementing partner for ACF in Liberia, and we use the cash during and after the Ebola to assist women that had lost all their businesses in the Ebola crisis, to re-establish them in businesses and also support them in their farming activities that they were engaged in. So
Your connection, what's your connection to Village Savings and Loan Association?
okay, We for Self is a women focused organization. We establish, we train, and we work with Village Savings and Loan Associations. We have about 500 groups of women in 10 counties in Liberia, and we work with them in different aspects. We do skills training for them. We do business skills training. We also do agriculture. We work with them in livelihood skills, also producing batik, producing recycled glass, and many other handicrafts for sustainability. So the cash was a part that we had to use. We had to find a strategy to work with them in cash instead of just cooking and eating, to be able to save some of the cash into the baby savings that will enable them to go back there and take loans to re-establish their businesses and improve on the existing businesses they already had.
Thanks, Grace. That's very helpful. And Tyler, I hope that answered your question a little bit there. I'm not seeing any other questions. Did anyone else have anything that they would like to ask any of our presenters? Okay. Just so you know, the full outcomes analysis is available on the Cash Learning website. It was published yesterday. The recording of this webinar will also be made available soon. So thank you very much all for joining, and please do get in touch with us here at the Cash Learning Partnership if you'd like to know more about this project and our findings. Thank you.